views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren, Jaime, and of course, we thank you for joining us. When you ask the question, what is the Social Justice Forums about? Well, it's an opportunity to talk about many of the inequities that people face. We talk about civic engagement, community involvement, and what you need to know. So stay tuned, because the Social Justice Forums starts right now. And welcome back to the show. Hurricane Katrina was one of the most destructive disasters in American history, flooding New Orleans with a lot of people, thousands in fact, losing their lives, homes, and jobs. Now, there are thousands of stories being told about the New Orleans survivors, but the story of Mississippians ignored. Our next guest is releasing the obscured stories captured in her book, Overlooked Voices, Hurricane Katrina, Mississippi Black Women Survivors, Resilience and Recovery. Joining me now is author and disaster expert, Dr. Ophir Davis. And Dr. Davis, good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me here to talk about these women's stories. And you're exactly right. They're overlooked.
Yeah, and when we talk about, like, literally the flood, a lot of people did pay attention to Katrina. And admittedly, I can say that a lot of the attention went to New Orleans. But give us, from your perspective, how Mississippi was impacted.
Well, you know, I will say this. Everybody probably focused on New Orleans because New Orleans is a big city and we've all gone there and we love that place. But Mississippi was overlooked because most people have never gone to Mississippi. And when they think of it, Mississippi, they don't have the, best, sounds like a helicopter is going over my head. I am outside. So
Okay.
that's what that was. It just left. So people don't know about Mississippi. They haven't traveled there. They don't know, when they think about the state, they think about the depressed state of the state. And so no one even realizes that Mississippi has an ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. Just like it is in Texas, it goes from Texas to Louisiana to Mississippi, all the way down to Florida. So no one knows that we even have a beach in Mississippi, and we do. So that's one of the reasons that it was overlooked, probably, when you think about the backdrop of New Orleans.
And when we talk about Mississippi, as things started to happen, we know that New Orleans got the announcement, hey, this is what's going on. We've got this devastating flood that's taking place, evacuation, trying to get rescue efforts in. How did Mississippi react during that time?
So what happened in Mississippi was quite different than New Orleans. So we saw what happened in New Orleans, but in Mississippi, we had a governor who was a Republican. And not only that, but he had great insights because he had been someone who had spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. So Mississippi, as far as the federal response, was really good in the state. And I write about that, and the women talk about the federal response in Mississippi here. But the thing that happened was the state was on its own for at least over 7 days to 10 days, because at first the response was a no response, just like it was in New Orleans. But after we got past the fact that Katrina actually happened and, there was a storm there, yes, since New Orleans is only 45 minutes from Mississippi, Mississippi started to do some things on its own. A lot of community workers in town started helping each other. This is something that the women talk about. So Mississippi, with the governor's contact, that helped a little bit in DC, but still, they didn't get the aid in Mississippi until 10 days after Katrina hit.
Wow, amazing. And I know that this really impacted you in such a way now that you decided, hey, I want to write about this. So give us a little bit about what was behind your writing and why you decided to write the book.
Okay, one of the reasons I decided to write the book is I'm originally from the state of Mississippi. I grew up in the Delta there, and I grew up in the Delta, but my dad and my mom would take my sisters and I down to the Mississippi Gulf Coast for vacations during the summer. And so I knew that New Orleans and Mississippi were close, that Mississippi was only 45 minutes from New Orleans. And I decided, as a trained researcher, that if something happened to New Orleans and there was a hurricane that was really bad there, which we saw on TV, then something had to happen to my beloved Mississippi Gulf Coast. And I wanted to be a part of telling the Mississippi story. So that's what even, initiated me to start the study back in 2005 when Katrina hit.
Yeah. And you paid an intense focus on Black women and how Black women actually survived and dealt with that. You chronicle stories and let people know a little bit more in depth. But for Black women, what was the impact like?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. The impact for Black women, as the impact is for Black women in all segments of life, it was great. Some of these women lost their homes. Some of these women lost their jobs. Some of these women, we were fortunate. The women I interviewed, they did not lose any family members, but they knew friends who lost family members. So just as the impact for Black women is really hard in our society in general, we saw what it looked like in the other state. And here in Mississippi, Black women still had a hard time after Katrina, in spite of the fact that we had this governor who was connected, and in spite of the fact that the aid didn't come until 10 days later. Black women are resilient, and therefore they dealt with what they had to deal with, and that's what I allow the women to do in the book. Tell their story, tell what their experience was like, and tell how they are resilient. So it's a great book to read.
Yeah, and when we talk about your book, it really chronicles about 10 years of life experience after Katrina, trying to find a job, trying to navigate, trying to make it through there. What was most compelling in what you were able to research and come up with?
Well, rather than give away the whole book, I'll give you just a little hint, your viewers a little hint. Actually, the women did lose their jobs, and many of them decided that they would go out, network amongst the people that they knew, because most of them had a college degree. That's one of the tips I'm giving you about the book right now. They had college degrees. So as a result of that, they went out and networked. They went out and decided, I'm going to get a job. One of them even said that to me. And so most of them, all of them actually, got new jobs. Some of them changed careers, became leaders in their community as far as employment is concerned. Other things they did, a lot of them, as I mentioned before, they had damage to their homes. Several of them lost their homes, and they talk about that in the book. Then they talk about what it was like to go through the process of trying to rebuild a new home in the midst of a disaster, kind of like what we've been dealing with the pandemic. We've been trying to figure out how to do life in the pandemic. And so a lot of them had to figure out how to do life again after Katrina, as far as getting new jobs, as far as getting their homes remodeled, or as far as buying new homes, or as far as trying to figure out how to navigate the time that they were dealing with. There was 100-degree temperature at the time in Mississippi right after Katrina. They were trying to figure out how to get food and water, kind of like what was happening with the pandemic. People are trying to figure out how to get food, jobs, and water right now. So the
Yeah.
experience of the women is similar kind of to what is happening now, because it was a disaster, and the pandemic was its own disaster. So the book goes in depth, lets the women talk about their stories individually, one at a time, so everybody can hear what they said and how they became resilient and now have recovered.
Yeah. What was your feeling like hearing that a lot of the focus really was on, New Orleans rather than Mississippi? And of course, being Mississippi bred, it had to leave a little bit of a distaste in your mouth.
Well, kind of like I mentioned before, New Orleans is a city we all love. Most of us have traveled there, enjoy going there, have a great time when we're there. So Mississippi has always been in the shadow, I'll say, of a place like New Orleans, since it's so close and only 45 minutes. But this is what I decided to do with that. One of the things I heard when I was a little girl is in Mississippi, a little girl in Mississippi, is this: if you're on top, New Orleans was broadcast a lot, there's always has to be someone who's holding you up. So guess what? I thought we're overlooked, but we're holding up the whole thing, because Mississippi took the brunt of the storm in Katrina. The entire infrastructure of the Mississippi Gulf Coast was destroyed as a result of Katrina. And as far as New Orleans is concerned, New Orleans was flooded, and there were some neighborhoods that were drastically destroyed. But Mississippi, imagine the entire section of one area of your region completely wiped out. Completely, the entire infrastructure. There are no stores, there are no grocery stores, there's no place people lost their homes. Imagine there are no businesses open, there's no McDonald's, there's no nothing. That's what it was like in Mississippi for at least 1 month after the disaster. So, yes, they were overlooked, but they were still holding up the whole thing that happened with Katrina because they lost much, much more on the entire 120-mile area of Mississippi than just one city in New Orleans. But we all love New Orleans. I'm not going to be up on New Orleans. We love it, and
Yeah.
that's the story on us, being overlooked. I found a way to still tell the stories. Is what I decided to do about Mississippi Hurricane Katrina survivors.
Yeah, I mean, it's no shade. I mean, New Orleans is a major city, and everyone loves New Orleans when you talk about the fact that we all do love New Orleans. But when you get down to it, you talk about a city versus a state, and a state that had a lot of challenges. And the problem that I raise now is we're in that season of hurricane again, where we're now in the midst of hurricane season. What can you tell us, because you're an expert on natural disasters, what can you tell us about possibly what we could be expecting right here our way?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. It's huge for us who are disaster scholars to talk about this. June was the hottest month in the history of the United States of America, the hottest month. So climate change is real. We're in the midst of hurricane season. We've only had one scare, Elsa. But you know what? Elsa was a wake-up call to us that we're in hurricane season. We are expecting, as disaster experts, we're expecting an overactive hurricane season this year. So one of the things your guests can do is find out their evacuation route from a hurricane. If anyone lives near a coastal area, you need to find your evacuation route right now while it's nice and sunny right now. 2, you need to pack a small disaster kit. It doesn't have to contain much, just water, a flashlight, batteries that work, and then, a snack or two, something that's packaged so you won't have to warm it up, so you won't have to open it. These are some key things that people can do right now. One third thing I'll mention that people can do is they can find out if they live in a flood zone. That data is, if you go to my website, it's right there. I give you one link and you click that link and you put your zip code in, and it will allow you to figure out if you are in a flood zone. So you will know what to do. You'll know your flood zone risk, you'll know your evacuation route, and you'll have your hurricane kit packed. So you'll be ready to go in case we get a disaster. And we expect more disasters this season than we had last season. And actually, this is expected to be the most disastrous hurricane season we've had in the United States since 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit.
Amazing, amazing. And we hope that you're wrong, but we understand that the reality is very real. And, we use a lot of that technology to find out what's going on. And we do know that's actually predicted. So prayers and thoughts are really going out, and hopefully people can be well prepared. In the issue of preparedness, what have you found? Have you found that most people, when it comes to that, are prepared? And particularly, give me a little bit about communities of color.
Well, you know what? I'll go right to my book to give you some information from the Black women that I studied in Mississippi after Katrina. One thing I learned about those women that they told me in the interviews was because they lived on a coastal area, which is what I just mentioned, because they lived on a coastal area, most of them had evacuated for future, past storms. So they did have some type of plan, not as organized as it is today. Today, since Katrina, their plan is much more organized. But most of them had a disaster plan, so of some sort. And they have tweaked that plan, and it's much better now. So that's one of the things I've learned about communities of color. We saw in New Orleans that, the disaster in news comes to, unfortunately, communities of color later than it does. Maybe that's the broadcast, maybe that's readership. I don't know what that's all attributed to, but what I know is we get the news a little bit later than other people might get it in our country. So, one, we can be aware, like I just mentioned, you can know your flood zone. If you just know that, I've made it easy for you to know that. If you know your exact evacuation route, I've made it easy to do that. So these are some key things that can help people of color in particular get ready, because we will expect another hurricane. We actually expect 4 major hurricanes this season before November 30th. So what I learned from communities of color and these Mississippi Black Hurricane Katrina survivors was, one, have some sort of plan in place. It doesn't have to be, written out and you've talked to everybody, but do talk to somebody about it. And then the other thing I learned from them after that was, once they got some kind of plan going, and you will read this in the book, they talk about their plan and how they communicated with family and how they communicated with officials and how they learned different information and when they learned different information and how they used the information that they learned in Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina to make their evacuation happen for them, to keep them and their families safe. So there's plenty of data in chapter 3 that's all about Katrina's coming, the evacuation needs to take place, and the women talk about how they did it.
Yeah. When you have a disaster, there are different stages that people go through, and it can be devastating. And I want you to tell me a little bit about some of the stages that people experience, especially immediately after disaster.
Well, I'll go right back to the women in my study again, because that is what I did the most research on for the last 15 years. And that's this. I remember the first interviews I had with these women in 2005. In October, Katrina hit in August. I interviewed the women the first time in October. And I allow readers to read these narratives in the book. But I remember those were really difficult interviews. The women's voices, dropped a lot of times during the interviews. The women had to pause and they had to collect themselves, and then they went on with the interview. So the notion of what the stages of what happens in disasters is real. I did notice that these women were having a difficult time, immediately after the disaster. I will say that the next year when I interviewed them, because I interviewed each of them every year since Katrina, the next year they were in a better place. They weren't completely resilient and have recovered yet, but they had figured out how to navigate the storm and use some chutzpah to kind of get themselves through it and make some decisions about, homes. They were still figuring out that piece. So the first year was what I noticed in the interviews. That was the most difficult year for the women. And so the stages of disasters are real. And then over time, maybe around year 5, I began to notice that, yeah, I hear their voices, they're different, their stories are different, they're moving, their vision is different for who they are and what they're going to do after Katrina. So as that happened, I noticed their resilience. And then as the stages of disaster goes, I noticed their recovery between 5 and 8, depending on the woman. And again, I allow them to give these narrations in the book. I saw the resilience and I saw the recovery. And that's what I want readers to see when they read this book.
Yeah. And I know you want them to see that, but also talk about the benefits. How do you think this actually benefits somebody that actually picks up this book and reads it?
Well, you know what? One benefit was a benefit to me. And that's why I know it will benefit readers. What I noticed was I got a lot of encouragement from reading these stories. I saw that regardless of what was happening in my life, I could help. I could do something about it. I could help people where I was. And I think readers will get that too.
Yeah. And from a perspective of a Black woman, how does your book really approach and change the narrative about Black women?
There are no studies on Black women in disasters in the United States of America. That means that this work is going to open the door for many women who want to start getting into this research, and it tells the stories of these Mississippi women in ways that have never been done. So I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to do it.
Dr. Davis, thank you for coming on, letting us know some real serious information when it comes to natural disasters, and definitely about the state of Mississippi and Black women and how they've recovered from the natural disasters. Got to take a quick break. We got more on the social justice forums. Our conversation continues coming up after these breaks. Recently, we sat down with the organization head, Ruth McFarlane from the Miss Foundation. She discussed the issues the organization is advocating for, such as economic justice, immigration laws, and reproductive rights. Let's take a look. Here, sharing more, is the Vice President of Advancement at the Miss Foundation for Women, Ruth McFarlane. And Ruth, great to have you.
I'm thrilled to be here. It's really great.
Thank you. So for somebody who does not know literally about the organization, I gave a little bit of an intro, but can you share with us a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, so we've been around now for almost 50 years. And so there's an origin story and there's a today story. Mm-hmm. And the origin story is really exciting. It's 4 women came together to found the Ms. Magazine, which at the time in the 70s was a cutting edge national magazine. It was the first magazine that took women's issues really seriously and expanded them beyond the domestic to political and all the other things that women want to think about with respect to their lives and the change that was happening in society at that time around women's rights. And those women were Gloria Steinem, Marlo Thomas, Letty Cotton Pogrebin, and Patricia Carbine. Well, they decided they're going to start a foundation from the Ms. Magazine, and that's how the Ms. Foundation started. And the agenda was really to make sure that resources got to women leading grassroots change across the country in little regions of the country, maybe in little towns, making sure those women got resources and making sure those women got to understand they were part of an ecosystem. And if you go forward now, decades later, it's what the Ms. Foundation is still doing today. The big change, I think, around how we do our work today is that we very explicitly center the lives of women and girls of color. So we talk about addressing issues that affect the lives of women and girls of color and use that gender plus race framework to orient under the feminist umbrella kind of how we think about making change in the world. We're still making grants. We're still funding first and early and trying to get money to the field, you know, maybe before other foundations and philanthropic groups have really made note of a leader in a particular region. And so this is a very exciting place, certainly for me to be working right now. And at this point in our history, it just feels like the United States is just really ready to have this conversation about gender and racial justice.
Yeah, and I was, really looking at where we are as a country, and we're talking more about, women and equality. We're seeing more and more, from an African American and Asian that's now of Asian descent, who's also now the Vice President of the United States, to seeing many different things that are occurring right now that, if look several years ago, aren't happening. Much is because of policy, and much is because of advocacy. Talk to me about the policy perspective of your work and how you really look to deal with policy.
Yeah, we support both at the federal and state level policy and legislation that is advancing where women need to be going next, where we need to be looking next to advance our equity. And that's across the sectors of safety, around health, and around economic justice. So when we talk about safety at Ms., we think very broadly. It's, of course, we're really interested in the issues of domestic violence. The Me Too movement is something that we have been very closely aligned with and funding into. Making sure that we're thinking about safety in terms of state-sanctioned violence. So we have funded organizations, for example, started by girls in response to some of what Black girls saw in their schools when school security and police actually were violent to students. And you can remember some of these incidents that we've seen in the news over the last few years. Well, in some cases, it's youth actually that respond to these situations and are raising up these issues. And so we're making sure those make it to the policy and legislative level by supporting and amplifying that. We're also in the economic justice space, thinking about policies that can advance further investment into the efforts and leadership of women and girls. Whether that is, and this will really illustrate the breadth of our movement based, our movement support, whether that's the Equality Act, which is really focused on, right, advancing opportunity and equity for LGBT folks, or that is the ERA, right, which is a piece of legislation that's been with us for a very, very long time and still alive, and looks at equity more broadly for women. And so we are, as a national organization, as the oldest national women's fund, we really do have a broad scope in the type of policy advocacy that we are doing. And with the new administration in the White House, it's really, really exciting to have a seat at that table, have a prominent seat at that table, and be able to advise as they are shaping their platform and their agenda around gender.
Yeah, you kind of answered my question, because I know that, previous presidential administration, there was not much by way of equality or conversations. In fact, it was more the degrading of women. Now that we've got new leadership, new political leadership, are you optimistic that a lot will take place in terms of really dealing with the issues concerning women, and more particularly when it comes to that women's pay gap?
Absolutely. I think it's it's on everybody's mind, but it's absolutely part of this administration's agenda. They formed a council that is specifically looking at these issues, and we are part of the advisory board for that council. And it is absolutely part of the agenda of this administration to make sure that when we come out of these 4 years, we've seen not just a repair of some of the things that have been taken apart in the last administration, but also forward movement. And I think I would be remiss in not mentioning, the impact of the pandemic on the economic status and the economic experience of women really can't be understated. I think the pandemic brought to bear some of the gaps that were there all along, right? Some of the issues, some of the fraying or the absence of a social safety net, we really saw those gaps and that fraying result in dire consequences during the pandemic. And I know the administration is focused on that information as well. Yeah, I could talk about that quite a bit. I don't know if you saw it, there was a really great article today released by S&P Global on, it's an economic analysis of the United States, looking at where our economy would be today had we not blocked and challenged the advancement of Black women educationally, in the workforce, et cetera. And what they found was we left $507 billion on the table because of the ways in which we have seen these gaps. And that's just between Black women and white women, right? And of course, there are women of many other types of experience and experiencing challenges as well. So I think as we start to look, I think the administration is focused on this, and others are as well, as we start to look at what does it mean? What do we learn if we look at our economic well-being through this lens of gender and race at the same time? What might we do differently, and how might we be even more successful and stronger as a nation?
Yeah. I want to talk about the pandemic for a moment. And obviously, for you as an organization, what was it like for you being able to still meet up with, those that you're serving and staying connected during a time when we were in severe isolation?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was, even just as a staff, it has been a learning curve. So our offices are based in Brooklyn, but I'm the first executive that's remote. And so I'm based out in Oakland, California. And I was remote before the pandemic. And so it was really interesting to have the rest of my colleagues kind of spread out across the country and begin to come to each other the way we are through these screens. It was interesting. We were in February, right before the pandemic, about to roll out funding called the Activist Collaboration Fund. And the intention of that fund was to really allow leaders and activists on the grassroots level to convene and gather in the way they needed to do. It was an ask we had received, come together how we want to get the work we need to get done. And as we were rolling that out, the pandemic hit, and we had to learn instantly how to turn our grant making into a response to what was happening right now for people. So that really, it was a challenge, but it was an opportunity. And over the course of the last year, we were able to offer that particular fund, 2 more times. It was intended to be a one-time pilot for the year, and we actually did it 3 times last year. And it allowed our program folks to just stay really closely connected to leaders as things change from day to day, as needs changed from day to day, so that we can remain informed and both help and get resources to the ground, but also elevate those stories up to philanthropy so that the philanthropic sector could remain closely connected and responsive to what was going on.
Give me a little bit about immigration. I want to talk about that for a minute as well, because when we talk about immigration, that was a huge issue in the last presidential administration. It still remains a topic of great challenge and controversy, but I know you're pretty boots on the ground with this issue right here too.
Yeah, we are. And it's important that we are, because very frequently the lives and the issues impacting the lives of immigrant women are not those that rise to the surface. They're not the stories that necessarily get told in the media. One of the organizations that we funded for a long time is the Garment Workers Center in Los Angeles. And that is a group, largely immigrant women, who are working in the garment sector and resourcing and this is just one grantee. Right now we support over around 100 organizations, but this is just one story of one grantee and a group of women really focused on making sure that workers' rights are being attended to, but then the lives of those communities are being attended to. So when the pandemic hit, they pivoted from being an advocacy organization to also making sure people got food, to making sure that local lawmakers were aware of the circumstances of those people's lives. And I think that's what's happening across the country. I think of another organization we have funded historically in New York called Adhikar, and they respond to the local community there in Queens to make sure, again, that the needs of these people are being attended to in specificity by local politicians.
And when we talk about immigration, I talk about immigration and rights, and there's also reproductive rights, and that's a battle that continues to be contended with right now. Have you made any progress in that area?
Yeah, I would say a few things. One, it's interesting, it's progress and it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? So we know there's a case pending now in front of the Supreme Court that will be a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade. And so we're watching that very, very closely and working to make sure that we rally across the nation, all of the organizations, activists, and other platforms that can get folks really educated about what's at stake here, so that we can make sure that we really raise the voices around that case as it's going through and people are aware of what's at stake. But on the flip side, we for years now have done really great work funding as it was sort of emerging, the work of reproductive justice, which goes beyond reproductive rights, but also looks at the lives of parents, the needs of, inclusive of childcare, inclusive of the resources you need to parent well, to make choices about whether or not to have children. And if you choose to have children, how to take good care of them, right? We're currently working on a project in the birth justice space with several close allies in our work. And that will look at funding groups that are really attending to access to maternal health care, care before the birth, care after the birth, and even the more broad space, again, of reproductive justice.
For people who want more information, how they get in contact with you?
Well, they can go to our website. It's www.forwomen.org. All
righty. Well, Ruth McFarlane, thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums, and we appreciate your conversation, and continue to update us, and we'll update our viewers.
All right. Sounds great. It was good to be with you.
All righty. We are taking a quick break. We encourage you to stay with us. We have more on the Social Justice Forums. We'll be right back in a few.
When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone. Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
And welcome back. In 2020, the Bronx Rising Initiative launched the Brandon Hendricks Scholarship in honor of a rising star from the community who was killed by senseless gun violence on June 29th of 2020. Now, to honor Brandon's life, the organization offers financial scholarships in his name to multiple high school seniors from the Bronx that have recently been admitted to college. Now, the recent winners of the Bronx Rising Scholarship Initiative, the Bronx Rising Initiative's Brandon Hendricks Scholarship, they actually do have a passion for fighting issues of inequity in their communities, and each one has a unique perspective and is able to speak on distinct issues that they've noticed and actually chosen to take on. Joining us now is 2021 Brandon Hendricks Scholarship recipients, Princess Della Tsivor, Lucki Islam, and Rachel Turbridy. And we want to thank all of you for joining us here and welcome. And I'll start off first and we'll ask the question. Well, let me start, let's see who I'll start off with. I'll start off with, Princess, and I'll talk to you about it for a second. Princess, give us a little bit about, first of all, your reaction to actually winning the scholarship.
I was honestly very surprised. When I got the email, I didn't feel like it was real. I just felt so honored to have been chosen as a recipient of the Brandon Hendricks Scholarship, and I feel like to have been given this opportunity will allow me to really fight for the inequity that I have seen in the Bronx community and trying to get people to advocate for it and find solutions to it.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to you in a few minutes, but thank you and congratulations to you. I'm gonna ask Lucki, what does it mean to you to be a recipient of this award, knowing how Brandon died and knowing that there's a fight now for justice?
I wasn't really close with Brandon, but like my brothers and some of his our close friends knew of Brandon. So we don't really call him Brandon, we call him B Diddy. And so just to know that I told my brothers, I think the first thing I told them, I was just like, yo, so I won the scholarship and they're doing a halftime show, would y'all be able to come with me? And I think that initially rather than just feeling I feel with a lot of things I didn't feel ecstatic or I didn't feel excited. Rather, I feel I was just oh my gosh, this happened. And then later I kind of felt very heavy. I felt very sad and just, it brought back a lot of things. And I feel I haven't really processed the whole winning things. And I feel when you're from the Bronx, you feel that a lot in terms of accomplishing big things like this, because it's hard for us to believe and I don't think that I'm ready to confront a lot of things yet. And that's just how I feel right now about the success, but I feel really good about it.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. And I know that, it's very hard for you knowing and being connected to your family, being connected to Brandon, and really now taking that and going into another level. I understand a little bit of the heaviness. Rachel, talk to me about your thoughts on being a recipient of the award.
Well, it was a very honoring experience to first get the email and the notification that I did win the scholarship, and thinking about the significance of that afterwards, after receiving the initial shock, I felt very honored that what I wrote about in my entry about being a musician and wanting to influence my community to get to know music and have that privilege of learning through resources like me, I realized that it can be quite significant in the midst of many difficulties and societal problems, such as reasons why Brandon ended up passing away. And it's something that I realized that bringing something like music, bringing a great resource and a source of creativity to people in my community and beyond can be a great impact to prevent future tragedies like these from folding out. And I feel that winning the scholarship will have me continue to explore exactly how I can tackle those issues with music and with the people around me passionate about music as I continue moving forward in my career. So those are my thoughts as of now.
Yeah, Rachel, that's awesome. And congratulations again to all of you, Rachel, Princess, and Lucki, for being scholarship recipients. And each of you had the opportunity to really write and deal with a particular issue of social justice and inequity. And share with me a little bit, Princess, because when it comes to you, you want to focus a little bit more on the healthcare disparities and what's going on with disparities in healthcare. So tell us what's on your mind.
So, I just graduated from a health and science charter school. So my school really honed in on the health and sciences. So with honing in there, I was able to see that there was a disparity in healthcare, and seeing that students in my school were able, not everyone was able to access healthcare, and seeing the effects of that on them, and then what my school and the clinic it's partnered with were doing to help ease this disparity and reduce it, really made me want to address it on a larger scale and advocate and push for the healthcare disparity to be noticed and to be reduced, because it seems like only some people are aware of it. Um, those who don't have access to it, some of them aren't aware that this disparity exists. Bringing awareness to them and to the it educates both sides.
Excellent. I want to take the time now to talk a little bit with Rachel. And Rachel, you know, you have a specific focus as well. And I want to talk a little bit to you about, you know, volunteering with Back to Bach Project.
So being in the Back to Bach project allows me and the other members to come to visit certain elementary schools and teach them about music, the opportunities they can have with learning an instrument or any other way of making music. And this is something that's quite significant because not everyone has the opportunity to grow up with having an instrument or having music lessons. So I feel that like the rest of my members feel that Back to Bach is something that's very significant for these schools that have never really encountered resources like these before that have helped us in our own lives. So I feel that it will end up having this younger generation right now in these schools we're visiting be able to grow up with a resource and a part of themselves that is creative and is productive in that sort of way. And they will be able to have a general focus that is much more positive and uplifting than sometimes it may seem when there's not really something good to focus on and productive in that way.
And when you talk about really focusing on the next generation, you're also trying to do some work in this regard too. You want to inspire them and through creativity. So what comes to your heart when you talk about trying to inspire that next generation through creativity?
Well, what comes to my heart is thinking about being in their exact place at that moment and knowing that it can be something that you can allow them to feel relatable to, even if at that age I had been playing an instrument and they hadn't been. It would be something that I can express to them how it allowed me to benefit in terms of having something to look forward to and something to express creativity through. So I feel it ends up being something that uplifts them in that way, knowing that their own self relating to my explanation will end up bringing them into further places in life than they could have imagined at the time without something like music.
Mm. And Lucki, I know that your passion is centered on filmmaking as well. And so for you, what is it that you'd like to see through the art of filmmaking?
Filmmaking is definitely like a rising passion of mine. I feel like I'm really interested in like the theater arts, and I feel like I want to do a lot within the arts field, like and I think starting off like is I'll start off with like my spoken word And I think that like going back to like music and just like I feel like poetry is also like a type of like music in a sense, and I feel that like I really want to focus on the arts and like use that to like not like heal, but I feel like work on like the traumas of like young boys of color in the South Bronx. And I feel like that there's a lot that goes into like the reasons of why like gun violence happens, or like why like you know, like young boys develop these like mentalities of where like they have to get out the hood or like things like that. And I feel like it is rooted within like poverty, is rooted within like substance abuse and just like, you know, like a bad home life. And I feel like these issues are highlighted sometimes when you see movies in the Bronx, but like it's kind of focused in like a negative aspect, as when you see like every like movie that takes place in like black neighborhoods is always kind of involves like a shooting or like, you know, somebody losing their life. And I feel like that's very accurate, but I feel like there's more to that. And I feel like sometimes they don't bring value to like the young boy's life in a sense. And like, and I think like using photography too, like within I work in like, I don't work with them, but like I feel like I'm a young member of their organization, and it's called like the Bronx Documentary Center, and they do a lot of like storytelling through photography. And I think specifically focusing on documentary photography, I really discovered my passion, I think, for like telling these stories as a youth, because a lot of the times that like they, not that they don't have a voice, but I feel like it's not a voice that is often listened to, because young boys are looked at as being immature, or like, you know, they're just not wise enough. And I feel like that's like far from the truth. I feel like they have a lot to say. I feel like they have a lot to offer in these spaces, and they don't often know that because nobody makes them feel that. Like they grow up thinking they're a troublemaker. They get suspended from schools and they get into fights. And I feel like there's more to that. Like they have a lot to offer, and I feel like whatever I do, whether it's theater, filmmaking, like I feel like I want to paint like these narratives truthfully. But I want to paint like real narratives, like of my brothers or like my own friends, not just like made up stories of like some boy that grew up on the block and, you know, he lost his life because he didn't know how to act. But I feel like there's so much truth to it, but I feel like it's rooted within trauma. And like nobody talks about traumas within our like education systems. Guidance counselors, they don't really like offer that help or support, at least from what I've seen in my experience. And I feel like there's a lot of like trauma work to be done, and that can all start now. Like we don't have to like worry about the next generation, because like the problem is within our own generation. And like we can't, I feel like we can't like start thinking about like, oh, I want to help the next generation if like our own generation is, we have these traumas. And like I feel like we need to work on it ourselves and like heal
Mm.
first, and then, you know, like start families and start other things, because it all comes back to us at the end of the day. Like when our inner child is just not like receiving that healing that it needs to be, like it's gonna stem into our own families, our own, I'm talking a lot, but like I feel like it all starts from like work within ourselves.
Mhm.
um and then we can figure out what to do next.
And I want to go back to Princess because thank you, Lucky. And I think that's, it's powerful to talk about the experience and the traumas that are very much a reality for a lot of people in our community. So when you deal with that and really put that out there for people to be able to deal with and to also respond to as a young person, I think you're going to have some great success. And Princess, I know, talking about being out there and dealing with some issues, affordable health care for you, that's huge too. So what can you tell us about affordable health care and what you'd like to see?
I was doing a project recently, or more like having a discussion with a group that I'm in called Bioforce, and we were discussing how healthcare isn't accessible to everyone. Um, they may say that there's Medicare for people of low income or very low income, but this doesn't include undocumented uh, immigrants. And even for immigrants who are documented, until you've lived in the state for a certain amount of years, you aren't qualified for certain for Medicaid. So the available healthcare services aren't sufficient and aren't affordable to everyone. So I feel like being able to make it accessible to everyone and not only on the cost side, but also on the kind of care that's given, the quality of care that's given. There's a lot of discrimination that's going on in the healthcare system, not only to racial, not only racial discrimination, but socioeconomic discrimination as well as sexual orientation discrimination. So I feel like um, giving more quality access to New Yorkers and just everyone in general, giving affordable health care and letting them be able to access the health care they need is really important. And going back to Lucky's point on healing the trauma, healthcare services in healthcare are able to help these young students, help these young people heal their trauma if they're given um, the counseling services they need or the therapy that they need to be able to benefit, and the aftercare of going to the doctor, educating them on how to really let themselves grow emotionally and socially. Is important to our development. So I think it's not only the affordable healthcare aspect that needs to be addressed, but the discrimination aspect as well.
Awesome. Lucky, I want to go back to you for a second because we talked a little bit about trauma. Sometimes I don't think that many adults really understand that trauma amongst youth is really big. It's really huge. And can you just share with me a little bit more? Because I know that's what you want to see, some help, trauma center and things of that nature. Talk to me about the trauma that youth are enduring and what your experience has been like.
Definitely. I feel like I don't even know where to start, to be honest. I think though, like I could only speak for myself. And I think starting off, like I feel like it all starts within like our parents, because my parents, they came from like another country, and it's definitely different from like a lot of experiences. But I feel like it all starts within like how our parents like kind of raise us in a sense. And I feel like there's a lot of like generational trauma that like they experience, and so that comes down to us, and like we don't know it um like while we're growing up, but like we realize that like there's a lot of reasons why we do the things we do, why we say the things we do, and like why we act in certain situations because of like those inner traumas that we never like really got to like figure out. And that plays out within our friendships, our relationships, because we never like really figured out like how to handle those kind of situations. But I think more so like it's just like a lot of things I feel like I couldn't really like talk to my parents growing up, and I feel like that goes for like death in a sense. And I feel like death is very like, it's a topic that you don't talk about often, other or like you hear people dying back in your country, and it's just like, oh, okay, like I feel for you. I never knew them, so I can't really like say nothing. But when it's like, oh, like my younger brother, like I know he's very like, he seems very hard on the like outside, like, but like he also has experienced like a lot of trauma, like, and my cousin as well. Just like last summer, I want to say they also like saw like one of their friends literally like die in front of them in the basketball field because it was so hot that like I'm not sure like what exactly happened, but like for like a 14-year-old boy to see that, like that is just like, that's really traumatizing. And I feel like they're I feel like they're the closest to me where like I feel like I have to kind of protect them in a sense. And I mean I can't like do much for them because there's just like a lot of things that they have already gone through that like, I can't do much. They're figuring out like things for themselves. But that goes back to just like school and just like their views on education. And sometimes like young boys feel like, oh, like school is dumb, like I don't want to go to school, like, oh, they're suspending me because I missed this many days of school, or like, especially with the pandemic, that was really enhanced because we saw that like there was a huge like disparity within like technology in the Bronx, where you see a lot of kids, they didn't have access to laptops, they didn't have access to proper working Wi-Fi, and that affected their attendance in school because teachers automatically assume that everybody has technology, that you have perfect working internet, that everybody has their own room, because as like it's really hard. And I feel like when you grow up in such a small space, living with like 6 family members, one apartment bedroom, it's like those become normal to you. And I feel like it wasn't until like in my high school experience where I realized, oh, there's some people that actually have their own bedroom. There's some people that, they could go away if they need to for like when this whole pandemic was happening, you see a lot of people leaving the city. And that wasn't an option for a lot of the people in the South Bronx. And that's why it was one of the most hard hit boroughs, of course. And I think that goes back to just like what Princess was talking about, like healthcare. There's a lot of environmental racism that happens within our borough. And I feel like the closest therapist that you could get sometimes is like, a lot of people they can't get access to it. Like I have like a friend that like, they live in Connecticut, but like every time they would call the therapist, like they were busy or like it doesn't make sense. And I feel like there's a lot of problems, and I feel like you have to look at the systems that are in place that are enforcing, these things, because they have internet providers, Optimum, like, they charge us like mad money for like internet that doesn't even work. And it's like, because our towers are not meant to sustain all of these devices in one single area. So I feel like I could talk a lot about like these issues, but I feel like essentially it goes back to the youth, and these are all things that like we experience and is normal to us until we have to go to college, until we have to go out in the real world and we realize, oh, this is not normal. And then that's when we start to think like, so how can I help myself, and how can I really like work on this, because I can't go to college and like people are looking at me like, why is she breaking down the middle class, because they're talking about these gun violence issues that are happening. Like these are things that are very prominent in our neighborhoods, and we have to like stop like looking at these things as if like, oh, this happened like once in a lifetime. Like these are things that we have experienced growing up, and it's become so normal to us that we're desensitized, that it it really affects us, our development. And I feel like the arts is a great way to just like look at everything, because you have a lot of people that love dance, you have a lot of people that love art, like speaking, like poetry. And I feel like a lot of the things that we want to say, that we want to describe, you can't really like tell it in a story. And I feel like the youth have found the arts in a sense, and like the Bronx is where hip hop originated, so it's just like a lot of these amazing things, and we want to bring it to life. And how can we do that? How can we work on our traumas? You work on it through a beautiful way. And I feel like the arts provides that for the youth and just anybody. Like
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for coming and sharing. I mean, honestly, it's been a great conversation, and you guys have enlightened us in a great kind of way. You're great representatives of our young people. I can see why you all were selected as scholarship winners, because you do have a passion, you do have a voice, and I just want to encourage you to continue to use your voice. That even when people don't want to hear, you still have to exercise it. And if you keep knocking, sooner or later, somebody's going to answer. So thank you both for being with us, Princess, Rachel, Lucki. Congratulations again, and thank you for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums. All right, everybody. Well, we want to let you know that about ends our Social Justice Forums. We had a great show, but I want you to know this. Continue to join us here on the show. We continue to elevate the conversation, promote civic engagement, and keep the dialogue flowing. As you can see, we got some very talented young people in our community. There's some voices that need to be heard. Certainly reach out and help them to have their voice be heard. I'm Daren Jaime saying take care. Next week, we'll catch you on the Social Justice Forums again.